The one thing Dan said, well, the two things he said at the end, he's like, he is a believer in Bitcoin as a solution to this. You need a money independent of government. But he also said the BRIC nations might not be affected by this, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, because they're not so anchored to the dollar system. And I think he's almost alluding to what everyone else has been alluding to. Like, yeah, we can talk about Putin attacking Ukraine, a sovereign nation, and yeah, being some evil invasion, but also at the same time, he has been talking about separating himself or separating the Russia from the constraints of the dollar system. They've been trying to trade oil with China outside of the dollar. Mm-hmm. So I think I didn't hear Putin say this.
This is a big theme of mine.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just backtrack a little bit. Pippa Malmgren, fairly well-known economist, she talks about World War III has already started, she says, and we're in a hot war in cold places. And by cold places, she means cyberspace, deep sea, space, the Arctic. And then she says we're in a cold war in hot places, Africa, Taiwan, so on. Quite a nice way of looking at things. But in her eyes, World War III has already started.
Is she English?
American. And she was a big cheese. She was like on President Bush's, one of his advisory committees. She's got a good Substack. Anyway, we have this situation where, the currency wars in currency terms, World War III has already started. And the way that the US weaponized the dollar against Russia was extraordinary. It confiscated its assets, and Russia's finding it very difficult to trade. So Putin retaliated by saying you have to pay rubles for our oil, and it resulted with the ruble being the best performing currency last year. Now, I've long since, Russia is desperately seeking alternatives to the dollar system. And they've got this guy who's designing a new monetary system, and his name's Sergei Glaziev, and his former Kremlin advisor. And he's designing this new money system for the Eurasia Economic Union. Now, have you heard of the Russian Davos?
Nope.
This would be in St. Petersburg every year, and it's in June every year. And I spoke to people who were there, and the overwhelming recurring theme of the Russian Davos last year in June is, what are we going to use instead of the US dollar? What system of money can we use? And so Glaziev is designing this new digital currency that's going to be backed by a basket of foreign currencies and natural resources. But when you back a currency with natural resources, it's very problematic because you've got grains go off after a year. So you start dealing with grain futures, and then grains are problematic. And oil, and you end up just using gold and silver because it's just easier. They become the things. But the problem with a currency that it would be for the nations, it would be China, India, Russia, Kyrgyzstan, all those stands, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkey wants to join it. And so China's got this thing called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is basically west of Japan and east of Ukraine. All those countries in that. And it's 40% of the world's population and something like 30% of its GDP, and it's the world's largest regional organization. And they want their own currency. But the problem with all those countries is they're not that trustworthy. And none of them trust each other. Mm-hmm. So how are they going to design a system of money where they all cooperate? And the beauty of the US dollar, and to an extent the euro, is that relatively speaking, everyone trusted America. So the US dollar kind of worked. Everyone knew that for all its problems, America, it's pretty sound. And so, it's partly American military might impose the dollar, but a lot of countries just took it on voluntarily because, do you know what, Americans more reliable than we are. Mm-hmm. And similarly, the euro, on a relatively, basis, all those countries, France, Germany, whatever, Holland, they all trusted each other, and so the euro kind of works. But those countries, Tajikistan, whoever it is, they don't trust each other. So my argument has been that they're going to end up using gold. But there's a problem with gold. And the other thing about gold is, I've spent ages studying China's gold holdings. And I'm just going to give you some numbers now. The America, and because the beauty of gold is everyone can trust it. Mm-hmm. Gold has its problems, which your listeners and you are well aware of. But the America has, let me just find the right figure here because I've got it written down, about 8,000 tons of gold in Fort Knox.
So they say.
Exactly. But let's just assume, for the sake of this, that they have 8,000 tons of gold. China, on the other hand, has about... sorry, I just can't find my numbers. Just give me one. 1,948 tons of China's stated gold. So about a bit less than a quarter of America's. But China has long since been the world's biggest gold producer. It's also long since been the world's biggest gold importer. And if it's very hard to, you can work out how much gold it's produced since 2000, and it's produced about 7,000 tons of gold. So already you're going, but you said your reserves are 1,948 and you've produced 7,000 tons of gold, and over half of your gold mining companies are state-owned. Already you're starting to go, that 1,948 tons figure is not right. Then you look at Chinese imports, and you can't measure all imports. You can measure imports from Hong Kong, but Dubai and Switzerland, the import, it's not all stated. But you can see how much gold has left the Shanghai Gold Exchange, which is where most of the gold that goes into China leaves via. And 22,000 tons of gold since 2008 have been purchased by and delivered to physical gold buyers in China. So that's 22,000 tons plus the 7,000 tons that it's mined. So 29,000 tons. Actually, the number's going to be bigger than that because the bars that the Shanghai Gold Exchange export are 12.5 kilo bars, and the Chinese central bank likes 12.5 kilo bars, but they don't go through the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So it's probably more. By the time you put all these numbers together, I arrive at a figure, and I've done the sums on my Substack, and you can, if somebody wants to read it, just frisby.substack.com. But there's 33,000 tons of gold has made its way to China since 2000.
Okay.
33,000 tons. Just log that figure. Let's assume that half of that gold is state-owned. It's probably higher, but let's assume, so 16,000 tons, 17,000 tons, about that figure. That is twice as much gold as America has. And that's assuming America has its gold. So, and we all know that China wants its own currency and it wants reserve currency status and blah, blah, blah. If China wanted to get involved in the currency wars, at the moment it's just stayed out of it, all it has to do is go, oh, actually, this is how much gold we've got. And if it suddenly has twice as much gold as America, then the whole global financial landscape changes with one announcement. And I don't think China's quite ready for that. We also know, by the way, that Russia's accumulated loads of gold. And this guy, there's an analyst called Zoltan Pozar who's arguing that all these shenanigans going on with Russian oil at the minute, where the EU and the United States are trying to pose a cap on Russian oil of $60 a barrel. And what's happening now is that India's importing Russian oil and re-exporting it as diesel, and America's buying the diesel to replenish its strategic reserves that it's been selling off in order to cap the oil price. So with the result, the Russian oil is kind of making its way to America. It's more complicated than that, but it's not going to last. And so a lot of people are saying, well, Putin's going to start demanding gold for oil if they're going to cap it at $60. I don't know if that happens, but there's a strong argument for it. And it's a natural progression of all the currency wars that have been going on. But then we have this wonderful quote that comes from Vladimir Putin last week. The problem with gold is still, I have to send you gold by post or by courier. I can't send it over the internet.
And that's
so how
risky.
I'll say, and how do we know that the gold is pure? We have to rely on third-party banks and exchanges to process the gold. We've still got the trust issue. So if only there was a system of money that you could send from A to B
was like
without
gold.
trusted third parties that preserved its value and blah, blah, blah.
Like a digital gold.
That kind of thing. Doesn't have to look shiny, though. And so Putin came up with this quote last week, and it just sounds like it could have been Satoshi Nakamoto who said this, but he said, "The technology of digital currencies and blockchains can be used to create a new system of international settlements that will be much more convenient, absolutely safe for its users, and most importantly, will not depend on banks or interference by third countries. I am confident that something like this will certainly be created and will develop because nobody likes the dictate of monopolists, which is harming all parties, including the monopolists themselves." Well, it already exists, Vladimir. And if you've self-Googled and you're listening to this podcast, go to bitcoin.org because you'll find all the information you need.
I mean, he will know. It's whether they want it to be that or something they feel like they have a bit more control over.
Sure, that's the problem. But as soon as they invent something themselves, they're creating trusted third parties and they're in that vortex. And so it might just be that they just go, well, okay, just for this trade, we'll use Bitcoin for this trade. Oh, actually, that worked quite well.
Yeah.
Let's just do it for this one. And, Trojan horse job.
Well, I mean, you can only hope. This is why we're here, right?
Yeah.
It's to try and communicate and educate people that there is a better way. And there are consequences to having this form of money, but ultimately this is a better way. And it's strange to hear... It's strange to hear someone like Vladimir Putin be the one to put it out and saying that. And I just want to know the game theory behind it for him.
Well, I just take people at value, and he's a game theory player. And the other big problem is, do we want to be facilitating trade for Putin? Is that's the problem with a censorship-free money. Anyone can use it, even bad people.
Yeah, I mean, I think Putin will always find a way to trade one way or another for one asset or another. So I don't think you stop him. But Bitcoin is money for enemies. So
yeah, it is the global money. It is the global reserve currency of the internet.